This week we'll talk about what to do when you have a webcomic script. How do you divide that script into pages? How do you even decide how many pages a scene needs? And how do you naturally let them flow into each other? And that's what we'll talk about in this video. Welcome back to Pencils and Stories. My name is Henrike and I make and teach comics. If you want to make your own comics as well, then subscribe to this YouTube channel for weekly videos. So if you're script like I do, you have your entire story written out in bullet points, and now it's up to you to divide all of those scenes into pages. What I usually do is I have natural splits of pages where I can end a page. I have kind of natural scenes when there's either a switch in location, a switch in character, or a switch in the situation that's happening, and that's when I usually end a page. And it's sometimes a little bit of a puzzle to make all of the panels that you want, that you need for your scene, rearrange them in a few pages and actually have the page end. So you don't have to start a new scene on the same page. It's always kind of awkward. You will have a switch usually in color scheme, or a switch in lighting, or a switch in characters and situations. You can use it. Obviously there's no rules of like you never do this or you never do that, but I usually try to end all my scenes on the same page and then start the new scene on a new page. But if for storytelling purposes it's helpful to actually start a new scene on a page. I've used it a few times so far in my comic, then definitely use it. But how do you divide a scene into pages? How do you decide how many panels go on a page and how many pages you need, and then how do you end it? So what I try to do, and this especially counts for webcomics, because usually a webcomic updates on a per page basis, is to have one page have its core thought. Even if it's a scene that's like ongoing and you're in the middle of a dialogue or whatever, I try to have one core idea on every single page. That can kind of give you a nice idea of like, I want to get this idea across and I need to do it in one page. So I need to make sure that it flows into a certain amount of panels, it doesn't get too crammed, and this is the space I have to work with. So this is a nice way to also keep the amount of pages in check, because if you have your script, you have your scene, you write out your scene in bullet points, is what I usually do. I have my entire story, then I take a scene, I write the scene out in bullet points, and then I try to divide those bullet points into pages. And sometimes you kind of already have a feel of like, I want this scene to be around, for example, just to name a thing, 7 pages. So you really need to make sure that your bullet points are not too elaborate, so you suddenly end up at 15 pages. Is a really easy way to get your comic way bigger than you want it to be. So if you already kind of know like, I think I need 7 pages for this, you can actually write down on a page per page thing of, this is my core idea that I want to bring across on this page, and then on this page I want this to happen, on this page I want this to happen. And so you kind of narrow down the options you have for your compositions and the amount of dialogue that you have and stuff. It can be really great to impose that kind of a limitation on yourself, so you don't have to make 20 million extra decisions, but you already kind of have an idea of what you have to work with and what you want to get across on the page. So when you're in the middle of a dialogue, this is where it can get kind of tricky, especially for a webcomic. The main difference in the way it's read in a webcomic and a print comic is that a print comic, you can just read it in one sitting. So it doesn't matter as much for a dialogue to be cut off at one page and continue in on the next. But if there's a week in between there, because you're posting a webcomic and you post one page every week, it can be really jarring to cut it in the middle of a dialogue because people forgot what your character was saying on the last page. So if you can kind of try and round up a train of thought, or have a natural switch in the dialogue where it makes more sense to cut it, if you have to cut it. There's no easy solutions for this, because sometimes you just have to. But like I said, try and make it a natural pause. Don't go in the middle of an argument and then just cut it off and then go on to the next page. But yeah, this can be really hard when you're making a webcomic. In webcomics, what you usually want to do is give your readers enough information on one page that kind of hooks them, and it's not a boring page to look at because it's just filler, but something is actually progressing in the story or in your character arc, and then you want them to be excited enough to tune back in next week for your next page. So one tip that can be really helpful, if you've divided your scene into pages, you know roughly how many pages you want, and you have kind of like an idea of layout sometimes as well. It can be helpful to actually put the text on the page as is and just kind of switch it around and see if there's too much text on your page, because a comic page with too much text can actually be less inviting to read because it's kind of overwhelming because there's so much text. In a comic, when it kind of starts to overstage the art and you see a lot of white from the balloons, that's when it can kind of look overwhelming. We don't necessarily like to read lots of text in comics. Sometimes you can't really escape it, but make sure that you kind of spread the text over multiple pages and not make one page one big text wall. So these are my tips for deciding on the amount of comic pages per scene. So that was it for this week's video. If you want to get free goodies and weekly tips and inspiration, subscribe to my email list to stay up to date. You'll get some free goodies delivered to your inbox right away and over the course of the next few days, so don't miss out. I want to thank you all so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful. If it was helpful, leave it a thumbs up so I know to make more videos like these. And I wish you a very great week, and go out and make some comics.